Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, October 10th, 2022, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. This week we have a really fascinating one for you. I think this one is going to have pretty broad appeal for most everybody who listens to Talk Nerdy, and hopefully you'll share it with some of your friends. Maybe we can get a few more people interested and listening. But before we dive into it, I do want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. I really wanted this week maybe give a shout out to those who over the lifetime of their contributions have contributed, I just used that word twice in the same sentence, over the lifetime of their patronage have contributed the most to the show. And so I'm going to do it in order, and I'm going to just thank you from the bottom of my heart. First and foremost is Brian Holden, David J.E. Smith, Jeffrey Sewell, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, Rob Schreck, Daniel Lang, Juan, Charles Bleal, Juan Gutierrez, Ken Pfeiffer, Pasquale Gelati, David Compton, Howard, and Doug Petitpied. What a beautiful name. I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you all so much. If you're interested in supporting the show, you can just visit patreon.com/talknerdy to learn more, or you can visit my website and click through the links. That's either carasantamaria.com or talknerdy.com. You can also visit the Talk Nerdy store while you're there. Okay, let's talk about this week's show because it's just, it's such a good one. So I had the opportunity to interview the author of a new book called This Is What It Sounds Like, What the Music You Love Says About You. So I sat down with Dr. Susan Rogers, and she's a cognitive neuroscientist and professor at Berklee College of Music. But prior to going back to school, or I shouldn't say back to school, but going to school in the first place, she had like a luminous career as a multi-platinum record producer. She was Prince's sound engineer. She was the first woman to receive the Music Producers Guild Outstanding Contribution to UK Music Award. And she's worked with like so many incredible artists. And so she really knows music in her brain, in her heart, in her bones. And she decided to learn what's going on in our heads when we listen to music. And what does the music that we listen to say about us? So here she is, without any further ado, Dr. Susan Rogers. And we are live. Well, not really live, but we are recording. Well, Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk with people about music, and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, and I'm especially excited to talk about, I myself was a musician way back in the day. That's what I first went to college, was to study vocal jazz performance. But I actually found that the academic study of music took something away from it for me. And I ultimately became first a neuroscientist, and now I'm working on becoming a psychologist. And you are a cognitive neuroscientist, but also not just somebody who like dabbles in music. You are a producer. Like, you have done a lot of really cool stuff. And so you're coming at this from a really interesting perspective, where you've got the music and like the real like career side of music linked with your work as a neuroscientist. So I have to ask you, you're at Berklee College of Music. Like, how many neuroscientists work at Berklee College of Music?
Well, they've just started to attract a couple more. A young colleague named Dr. Erica Knowles has her PhD out of Northwestern, one of the world's foremost laboratories for auditory neuroscience. So Erica is at Berklee now. I've just retired. I still teach for Berklee Online, but I'm not on the campus anymore. They do have neuroscientists there. They're getting more and more PhDs.
That's fascinating. I mean, obviously it makes sense if you stop and think about it, but I think probably most people wouldn't assume that there would be many scientists at a music composition and performance school.
You know, I remember being at a conference, the New England Music Cognition Group. It was about 10, 15 years ago, and the eminent scientist Peter Cariani said, 10 years from now, every music conservatory is going to offer mandatory courses in music perception and cognition. That made good sense to me. I don't know if his prediction came true, but those courses are really popular at Berklee. The psychoacoustics, which I teach, and music cognition as well, very popular. The kids are really into it.
Oh, I love that. So are you kind of focusing on everything from, what is a sound wave to how does mechanistically, how does the kind of hardware in your ear pick up these sound waves to how do they translate into neural signals and beyond?
Yes, all of that. So psychoacoustics, I was fortunate to have one of the world's leading authorities in psychoacoustics as one of my doctoral advisors. Psychoacoustics is about the auditory path from the ear all the way up to the brain, the data, the mechanism, how the thing works. The other half of music perception and cognition is music cognition, and that's the top-down processing. That's the knowledge that concerns memory and learning and development. What do babies know and when do they know it? It also concerns things like music and emotion, music and personality. Researchers have actually looked at do certain personality types gravitate towards certain kinds of music? The early data suggests that, yeah, that's probably true. But anyway, having learned both music cognition and psychoacoustics, I can look at it from a lot of different lenses.
Oh, I love that. And so for those who don't know, because there's so much terminology to throw around, you did a great job of kind of clarifying the difference. And of course there's some overlap between psychoacoustics and like music cognition or the cognition around music processing. What is musicology? When people use the word musicology, what are they actually referring to?
That's a question that someone who's a musicologist could certainly answer better than I. But I believe it is the study of how music works, but not necessarily neurologically. It's the
Right.
study of
Okay.
music itself.
So sort of the different time signatures and the different like sort of understanding both what's going on structurally within music, but also I think I took a musicology course in college, and I feel like not only did we learn all of the basics that most of us already knew about how to read music and basic composition, but also like richer examples of how that plays out, really appreciating different types of music and being able to recognize things like, okay, this classical piece, what time signature and what key is this written in? Like that to me felt like what we did mostly in musicology, but I'm sure it gets a lot more advanced than that.
Yeah, and ethnomusicology is the same thing, but the music of the world, the peoples of the world, and the sorts of ways that they express themselves musically.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, instead of this very kind of narrow Western focus, which is what most of us here in the US and obviously many European countries have long been trained within. Okay, so I'm curious about your work because obviously you told me, you spoke a bit about the courses that you teach, but what did you yourself research? What are you yourself interested in or have been interested in throughout your career as a neuroscientist?
My career as a neuroscientist has been relatively short. I was in the recording studio for 22 years, and then when I started my academic career, I was 44 years old and I entered college as a freshman, did 8 straight years and got my PhD, and then I leaped right into teaching at Berklee. Now, for better and for worse, Berklee College of Music is not a research institution. So I haven't had too much of an opportunity to do empirical research as I would at a research university. But while I've been able to do a little bit of research, the topics I've been focused on are auditory short-term memory. That was part of my doctoral thesis. The origins of consonance and dissonance. What makes a perfect fifth so darn perfect, and what makes a tritone diabolus in musica, the devil in music. Then the little bit of research I've been able to do since joining Berklee included the most recent project I've done, which is what people see in their mind's eye when they're listening to their favorite music. What sorts of visualizations do they have? This one kind of knocked me for a loop when I discovered that there was such variety. in this. I did not expect that. I assumed naively that everyone saw the same thing that I see in my mind's eye when I listen to my favorite music, namely the artist performing. But it turns out that there's a wide variety of visualizations that people experience. And my co-author, Ogi Ogas, and I, we discovered this when we conducted some research in preparation for our book.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I don't see the musician performing at all. At all.
What
That's
do you
so
see
funny.
when you listen to your favorite music?
I think it depends on the music and the kind of emotionality and how connected to it I am. I think sometimes I tend to listen to a lot of very nostalgic music.
Uh-huh.
So I think sometimes it's there's a memory sense there, and I might see experiences from my past. But I also think sometimes I don't necessarily see visualizations as much as I feel emotional responses to the music. And it must be really curious. When you were doing this research, did you come across anybody who doesn't have a mind's eye?
Yes.
It's so fascinating that there are people who don't visualize in their minds.
Mm-hmm.
They can't.
It's called aphantasia, and I think it's about 3%, 2 or 3% of the population that is thought to have aphantasia. It's relatively new in the neuroscience community, so there's not a lot of data on it just yet. There will be soon. Ogi and I did a survey, 3 different surveys across the United States to find out what people see in their mind's eye, and most people, roughly 25%, visualize autobiographical memories when they're listening to their favorite music. And then the second most popular, around 19%, was the story in the lyrics. A lot of people like to make up a story that goes with the words of the song.
I think I've done that before too. How funny. Yeah, that definitely feels like it doesn't feel that far-fetched to me.
Yeah. I do that very, very rarely, but I have. I think most of us have a go-to visualization. The remainder were all sort of equally dispersed, right around 10% or so. Some people see the artist performing as I do, and some people see themselves performing. I try to do that, but I'm not a musician, so I can never hang on to it for very long. And some people see nature scenes like the beach or the ocean or mountains or rivers, or they imagine driving. And this was interesting. Some young people told me that what they see is the room or the building or the structure that would go with that particular piece of music. And it turned out, when queried, these young people were video gamers, and they're used to having music accompany them as they go through different scenes in a video game. I thought that was really interesting.
How funny. Yeah, and I think for some people, the AirPods, the kind of the way that you can always be plugged into your music. We've got Spotify streaming. We've got our little in-ear buds. I walk around my town. I don't have a car right now since I moved to Florida, and I walk everywhere, and I just always have music in my ears. And so you have this almost this soundtrack component to music. This is my walking music. This is my, working music. This is my exercise music. It must be evocative of those same scenes and emotions.
It might be. This is a fairly new development in human history. Throughout nearly all of human history, music listening was an active pursuit. It was what you did. It was an activity in and of itself. You sat there with other people or even alone and you listened to music. But once music became portable, it changed into being primarily a passive activity, which means that music itself is probably changing in order to better serve these other activities. Like you wouldn't have done a workout at the gym to Led Zeppelin back in the 1970s. I don't think, you wouldn't have performed a lot of activities with music as a background unless you put on a record at home while you're cooking or something. But for the most part, when you had music playing, you were paying attention to it. These days, we're not necessarily paying attention to it. So now music needs to function differently if it's going to worm its way into our psyche and into our memories and cause us to bond to it, because it's not right in the spotlight of our attention.
You're so right. And I mean, I think about the fact, for example, at the end of the year, Spotify loves to publish. They're like, these are my top artists and these are my top playlists. And I never publish any of mine because every night when I sleep, I listen to ambient playlists. And so it looks like the vast majority of the music that I listen to is just like weird noise. But
Mm-hmm.
that's just because I'm asleep. During the day, I'm more actively listening, and so it's like it screws up the algorithm, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the main themes running through this book, this is what it sounds like, is that functionality of music. Like the reason we love music, the music that makes it to the top of our playlist, is music that works for us. And what you need it to do for you varies, depends on the individual. Some people need music to keep them company. And when we're young, we often need music to solve problems for us, social problems. We need to listen to those lyrics. We need to develop that attitude. We need to try on other identities to see who we might be out there in the world. Music is first and foremost functional. It's serving some use for our brain, which is why it gets selected over other songs, other recording artists. That's endlessly fascinating to me, this notion of what people are actually hoping to achieve when they select a piece of music and hit play. What is it they want to happen? I can spend the rest of my life studying that.
Oh, it's so funny that you say that because I even think of the language that we use, the labels, right? Like, I know people who are really obsessive about their music and they have playlists that have labels that have to do with the um, artists or I don't know, the vibe or whatever. But all of my playlists are exactly what you just pointed to. They're
Mm-hmm.
called things like feels or get it, because it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I need to listen to wake up music now. I need to
Mm-hmm.
listen to, music that puts me in my feels now. And one is called relax and one is called sleep. They are
Mm-hmm.
exactly named for what their purpose is.
Functionality. It's such an interesting thought to think of a brain saying that it has a desire. It's got wants and it's got needs. And it's important to make the distinction in music between wanting and liking. With the students in class will play a record, their work in progress, and it sounds pretty good, and I'll tell them so, and I can say, honestly, I like that, but that doesn't mean I'll ever play it again. The only music that I'm ever going to play again is music that causes I need that reaction, where my brain says, what this thing is doing is solving a problem for me. And I'm going to be damn sure I know how to access this record again so that I can hear it again, so I can always have access to that solution to whatever problem I might have. And I don't mean a hardcore problem like, I don't know, figuring out um, how to beat your dad at chess or something. I mean, solving a problem like right now, I just really want a groove that feels like it's going to amp me up. Or right now, I really want to feel. I want words for this romantic feeling I'm experiencing, or my heart, it feels like it's about to burst. Give me a melody. Give me a melody that matches what I'm about to think and say and do and feel. Um, when you hear a piece of music that is going to be the just right solution for some future need, that goes into your playlist.
Oh, absolutely. Gosh, like so many questions come up for me that I have to organize my thoughts in order to make sure that the time I get with you is used appropriately. So I do want in a few moments to kind of take a step back and talk about all the cool stuff you did before you went back to school or before you went to school to begin with, because that's just
Mm-hmm.
it's just fascinating and it's such a great and important conversation to have. You're never too old. I went back to school for my PhD as well, but I did my undergrad sort of at the time that a lot of kids do, and so it's just really cool to hear that you went back even to do your undergrad. But before we dive into your kind of past career, I have to ask you, I don't know why this comes up for me based on the things that you were just so eloquently saying, but do you ever run up against individuals or do you ever grapple philosophically with the idea of sort of, yeah, but music just is, there's a qualitative component to it that the more I analyze it and the more I try to quantitatively or scientifically understand it, the kind of the less it feels for me? Like, is there a dichotomy or a concern there for you that studying music academically or doing the type of investigative work that you do actually takes some of the magic away? Or do you feel like it always just makes it more magical?
It's a valid question, but I think the answer is no. So I've been asked a few times, now that you've studied the brain and music, you know all these things about it. If you were to go back into the recording studio and make a record with someone, how would that affect, or would that
Mm,
affect your record
right.
making? And my response is always two words: hell no. Hell no. When you're in the studio, when you're actually dancing with music, when you're embracing it, when you're engaging with it, you're not thinking analytically, and thinking analytically would probably throw you off step. Music needs to be felt and intuited. In the very last chapter in the book, I draw a parallel between falling in love with a record and falling in love with a human being. And sure, you can go out with your friends and have a glass of wine and talk about the good and bad of your sweetheart, but you're not with them for how they add up on paper. Falling in love with a record is like falling in love with a human being, because no record is ever going to be perfect and no human being is ever going to be perfect. There are always going to be flaws, but it's choosing the things that matter the most to you and going ahead and neglecting the things that you just don't care so much about.
Yeah, it's almost like I mean, and this has long been my view from a psychology neuroscience perspective, where I sort of vary from some of my colleagues in that I have a very gestalt kind of appreciation of. I'm an existential psychotherapist, so I'm often looking at this idea that, of course, the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That I can analyze things as much as I want to, and I can get a lot of really beautiful and rich information from scientific investigation, but there's still something about music that no computer program is ever going to be able to make sense of.
Mm.
It's like fundamentally human.
Yeah, people have asked a couple of times recently, okay, now I've told you some of the songs that I like the best. What does that reveal about me?
Oh, right.
And
Like a
that's
horoscope.
that's the subtitle of the book. And I have to
Yeah.
say, I kind of wish in hindsight, I had changed that subtitle. It shouldn't say what it reveals about you. It should say how it reveals you. Because if you know a little bit more about the elements of music and what our brain is focusing on when it's listening to music, you'll get a deeper sense of how these elements work on the records that you love. You'll have a better sense of your listener profile and what I like to call the music of you. You'll know you'll know yourself as a listener a little bit better. But this book is not intended to be predictive. As you just said, it's too complicated. There are too many variables why we like what we like. This is why search engines can't say for sure, well, if you like this record, you're probably going to like that record. There are many, many reasons why we might or we might not.
Yeah, it's so true. Those algorithms that these like large kind of aggregators use, some of them are better than others, and sometimes they're so spot on. But there's a reason that they all include some sort of feedback mechanism to say, you got it this time, or nope, not this
Mm,
one, because they're constantly, I think the AI, right, is constantly trying to learn exactly what your sweet spot is. And I don't know if there is ever going to be a perfect algorithm, because I don't know if that sweet spot is just an aggregation of component parts.
mm. I think of the listener profile as a constellation of 7 sweet spots. And I
Okay.
think along these 7 dimensions of music listening that I talked about. And I think of it a little bit like outer space. If you study any cosmology or anything like that, you learn just the numbers are so huge. The vastness is so incredibly vast. We can't wrap our minds around it. So my listener profile, let's say it has 7 sweet spots. It could have more, but some of them have a stronger gravitational pull than others. Some are smaller planets than others. So lyrics matter less to me than rhythm does. Timbre matters greatly to me, but novelty versus familiarity, that doesn't matter to me as much. So when a given record comes along, it might be really close to that strong gravitational pull of my sweet spot on in rhythm, and I'm going to love that damn record. I am going to love that record. It might also be just somewhere in the middle of this constellation. In the book, I used Old Town Road by Lil Nas X as an example. I like that record. I like it just fine, but I'm not in love with it. I'm not going to go and play it just because I must hear it. I need to hear it. It's close enough to all of the sweet spots, all of the stars in my little solar system here of listening. It's close enough that I like it. It's not close enough to any one of those 7 to feel that gravitational pull. That, if you think of it that way, you recognize, well, this is infinitely variable.
Oh, I love that so much. So, and I'm starting to really kind of conceptualize my own sweet spots, and it's so funny how even just in the 3 that you listed, you mentioned lyrics, you mentioned novelty, and you mentioned rhythm. Um, Mine are vastly different. I'm very much focused on lyrics, probably because I was a vocalist. That was always my area. It was like a jazz vocalist, so that was heavy for me. Novelty versus familiarity. I almost never like music the first time I hear it because I don't know it yet. It doesn't capture me. I mean, it's very rare for a piece of music to grab me the very first time. But the more I listen to the things that I like and the more familiar they become, the deeper my love for them is. And then rhythm, of course, matters to me, but I would say that melody, for example, matters more. Like, I don't know. It's so fast. So those are 3. You mentioned rhythm, novelty, and the lyrics. What are the other 4?
Well, Ogie and I describe in the book 7 dimensions of music listening, and 4 of them they pertain to music. And each one of them uh, activates a different region of the brain. And so each one of these 4 can independently give us a reward of a hit of dopamine from listening. And there's melody, lyrics, rhythm, and timbre. Timbre is sound itself, the sound design of a record. Those are the 4 musical dimensions. The 3 aesthetic dimensions apply to any kind of art, be it painting or sculpture or dance or movies or television. And those 3 aesthetic dimensions are novel versus familiar objects. Some of us really have an appetite for the groundbreaking avant-garde in any work of art, and others have a greater appreciation for familiarity in a work of art so that we can better appreciate the individual unique details, virtuoso technique, shall we say, in an art form. And then 2 more are realism versus abstraction. I personally like realistic records in the sense that they're records made by real physical musical instruments. They feature drums and bass and guitars and piano and saxophones and strings, things that I can picture easily in my mind's eye. And that's probably why I like realistic records, because I like picturing the artist playing. But many people prefer more abstract records that are made with virtual computer software based musical instruments that you can't see. You can't picture what that sound is in many cases because somebody just made it up. That's an abstract record, and a lot of electronic music and techno features entirely abstract musical instruments. Some people have a preference for that. Ogie, my co-author, does because his go-to visualization is abstract shapes and colors. And when he listens to music with lyrics, the kind of realistic records I like, he can't get the fantasy he wants. And what he wants is to see science fiction worlds and other planets and have his mind go to these fantastical scenes. Then the last aesthetic dimension is something that we were all well aware of in the recording studio in my day, and that's authenticity. It's the perception of where you think these musical gestures are coming from. Is this singer singing from the heart? Is this singer singing from the belly button or the gut? Just a guttural bellow? Or is this singer so perfect with his or her technique that they're singing from the neck up. Now, all of it can be good, but if someone is singing from the neck up, let's say, and they've got technique, but they're not feeling it, music can sound stilted and
I
clenched and
completely
soulless
agree.
and
Yeah.
banal.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
had a colleague in I was in a competitive like jazz choir in high school and early college, and I remember there was a person, I'm not even going to say their gender, who would win every award, and I was like, I cannot stand listening to this person because they sound like a MIDI machine. Like they were so technically perfect, but there was no soul in any of their performances. And then I knew others who would have a little gravel here, a little scoop there, a little something that their vocal coach was always trying to kind of train them out of, but it made them who they were. And it really, you could feel it.
Yes, I love those imperfections. For me personally, I like my music to come from below the neck or to sound as though it comes from below the neck. I like how my friend Tommy Jordan said, the wrong note played with gusto always sounds better than the right note played timidly. That's to me so true. Just grab that instrument, just get on that mic, just give me that gusto. I'm listening for the intentionality in your performance gestures. Now, that's not to say, though, that technical perfection is automatically going to be soulless, because certainly you can think of Ella Fitzgerald as technically perfect as a singer can possibly get, and yet her soul goes all the way down to the tips of her toes. We listen for that in the recording studio, that authenticity, and each of us probably has a sweet spot on that dimension.
Yeah, and I think about choruses and how different roles work for different styles of performance. Of course, I'm so vocally oriented, so you're going to hear
Mm-hmm,
me say
mm-hmm,
that a lot.
mm-hmm.
But I also remember being in high school, and there was a boy in our he was like I think he lived in our town for maybe 6 months, and his name was Quindon Tarver, and he was this phenomenal vocalist that was on the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack. He did all of the young altar boy soloing on that soundtrack, and he was so good and just breathtaking, but he had a really hard time fitting in the chorus because his voice didn't blend, it didn't match, he couldn't put the breath in it. He had this unique and stunning quality to his voice. He was a soloist. And some people can be both, right? But some people struggle to be one or the other because they can't kind of change their instrument to blend into the background and then change their instrument again to kind of shine in the foreground.
That's true. And that concerns timbre. You know, humans have evolved to be exquisitely sensitive to human voices. It's without a doubt the most important sound in our world is the human voice. Our species evolved because it had an ear for the human voice. Some interesting things that I discovered in doing research for this book is that human beings, proto-human beings, tens of thousands of years ago, um, found each other often in the dark. They mated in caves or in the jungle, and consequently, it is thought that that allowed us to have a very high regard for the timbre of the opposite gender, their vocal timbre. An interesting bit of research showed that women with sexy voices actually have more sex than women with sexy bodies. If you quantify sex by the age at which they first started having sex and how many partners they've had and whether or not they've been faithful, women with sexy voices have more sex than women with sexy bodies. Men
No
place,
way. That's
yes, even,
amazing.
yeah, the researcher is Sarah Collins on that one, I believe. And another interesting thing, also Sarah Collins, an interesting thing is that women have strong preferences for male voices, but unfortunately, we're really bad at telling what those voices predict. So Sarah asked women to judge these recordings of men's voices, and she asked them to judge the man's height and his age and his weight and whether he has a lot of facial hair and if he's wealthy or poor or if he's got a big chest or something like that, or rate him on all these different variables. And the women had strong preferences, but in their guesses, they were basically wrong on everything except for, I think, age.
Okay,
Or
so
maybe it was
really our
Wade.
voice is not predictive, or maybe it's the other way around, but like the cage that holds the voice doesn't necessarily tell you much about the voice that's coming out.
Yeah. Now, what the voice does tell us is whether or not a person is healthy or if they're in a good or bad mood. We can read a lot into those
Mm-hmm.
voices, but women trying to predict a man's physical characteristics from his voice alone were often wrong. That said, women still had strong, strong preferences.
Oh, it's so fascinating. And I mean, it's just another example of how deep the research can really go into this kind of neuro and psycho and cognitive and musical multidisciplinary approach to understanding sounds and how uh, auditory experiences are so fundamentally human.
Yes, and when you think about it that way, and you read about a study that looked at female sheep and sheep that were having a reaction to pictures of female sheep having a reaction to pictures of male sheep, and the females getting really responsive to some of those males and not others. When you when you think about it that way, one, it's really funny. Imagine being in the lab with female sheep, showing them pictures of male sheep, and measuring a physiological reaction in this female sheep where she's basically saying, yeah, that guy, now that's what I'm talking about. Swipe
Mm-hmm.
left or swipe right or whatever it is, however people swipe. Anyway, it tells us that we are decision making machines. We can't help ourselves. We have preferences. We like what we like. It may be some quality that we have absolutely no awareness of. We just know that we like it. I, um, I revel in how different we all are as music listeners. Any student at Berklee who might say, and sometimes they do say this, I want to make music that touches everyone in the world, that everyone likes. You have to gently let them know that's a really naive goal. You couldn't make a food that everyone on earth liked. You couldn't design a piece of clothing that everyone liked. Don't worry about pleasing everyone. Find the people that like what you like and please them. The others, let them have their own taste. Let them go their own way.
And that also speaks so importantly. And I mean, I've had this conversation with individuals who are working on science communication, individuals who are working on becoming psychotherapists. It really speaks to authenticity as well, because as you try to open up to a larger and larger audience, as you try to please more and more people, you end up losing a part of yourself. And when you do something simply because you love it and you just hope people, that's how I feel about this podcast. And I know it's not the biggest podcast on the planet. I guest on other shows. I even co-host another show that's much larger than this show. But this one is my baby because I get to do what I love and just talk to people about things that interest me.
Yeah, the love is the single biggest motivating factor for me. When I think about why I wanted to write this book, the answer is a short one. It's just love. I used to love in the recording studio at the end of the night, you work a long 12-hour day and you sit around with the musicians, and some of them would have a beer or they might smoke a joint or whatever it is they do. And you sit around and inevitably you just talk about music. You talk about how it works, what it does, what you love about it, what you love in what other people are doing musically. There's a reverence that just fills the air, and that reverence includes a strong component of mystery. See, these are people who play sessions day in and day out. These are experts who make their living at music, and yet the conversation always seems to leave these question marks floating in the air. It's a really beautiful thing, and I wanted to take readers to that place where we sit around and talk about music, not from an erudite academic point of view, but from a point of view of genuine love. Now, if you've got a PhD in music perception and cognition, you can add some brain science to the mix, sure. But what we really enjoy is talking about our mutual love, this thing we've devoted our lives to or just had as a companion throughout our lives.
Oh, I love that so much. And, I think that is a good segue into this, this story of your life and how, obviously sort of a second career. You went into the academic side, but you have won awards. You are a multi-platinum music producer. Like, you really have had a rich and fulfilling career in music. So I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about how you got started, what some of the highlights were. I mean, I don't know how one can encapsulate their career in a few minutes, but I'm sure you've gotten some practice as you've been promoting the book.
Yeah, I was a kid who grew up in Anaheim, California, and just was crazy about music, the radio and buying 45s whenever I could. And that's not unusual for kids. A lot of kids just really love music. So what tends to happen when you've got a child that loves music is right away you sign them up for music lessons. And my parents did, but that wasn't a good fit for me. I didn't feel any attraction toward playing or singing or writing. I really felt an attraction to records, to recorded music. That's where the magic was happening. When I got a little older, I knew I wanted to be where records were being made, and I wanted to contribute somehow. I moved not that far away from Anaheim into Hollywood, and decided that the smart way for me to begin my career would be as an audio technician. Now, an audio technician is the person who repairs the equipment when it breaks down. That was a smart move because in 1978, when I started, you didn't see women recording engineers. You never heard of women record producers. They just weren't in that profoundly male-dominated world.
Well, I mean, there probably still aren't nearly as many as there
It's a
are
pretty
men.
small number. Yeah, it's growing. It's
yeah.
growing, the proportion of women, but still pretty small. But being a tech means there's an objective, not a subjective standard. If the tape machine is broken, it doesn't care that you don't have a Y chromosome. Get in there and fix it. And if it's fixed, it's fixed. So I started my career as a technician, and then I got just the break of a lifetime. Prince was looking for an audio technician, and he was my favorite artist in the whole world. This was 1983, and had all his records. I'd seen his concerts. I was a crazy Prince fan, and he needed a tech, and I knew right away, well, his search is over because that's my job. And I got that job. He transitioned me from technician into recording engineer. When I left Prince, I then was able to transition into record producer and mixer and have quite a varied career there in the studio.
And so did you work with Prince for a long time? Did you work with him ever as a producer as well?
No, Prince always produced his own music. He didn't have a producer, but I engineered with him and mixed, of course, with him. I was his full-time employee, so I was with him every day on tour and making movies and videos. Anything he was doing, I was there with him because Prince wanted to be making music every single day. And if he was making music, he wanted to be recording it. So I like to call it a tour of duty, but I was with him a little over 4 years. And in that time, I think I did 15 years worth of work. We worked ridiculous hours. It was incredible.
Wow. Did you find it difficult to transition then from being basically, like you said, a full-time employee of Prince's and sort of tailoring everything to his musicality, his taste? He was also, as you mentioned, your favorite artist. And then to be able to say, okay, no, now I'm going to work with somebody wildly different. A, was it hard to get work sort of as you transitioned? And B, was it hard to adapt to a new artist, a new style?
Oh, that's a very insightful question because, yeah, actually, I got work right away. The first artist I worked with after Prince was the Jacksons. Not Michael, but all the rest of the brothers made a record out in California and they invited me. So I got work. But as Dylan Dresdow, who was one of Prince's engineers in the early 2000s, as he once said, you had to unlearn Prince. Prince was so unusual that you couldn't take the skills or techniques that you applied to his music and apply it to other people's all the time. Sometimes you'd get away with it, but most of the time you couldn't. So it did take me a few years of really struggling to transition from Prince's ear, Prince's sonic signature, to developing my own sonic signature and learning how to apply that sonic signature to other styles of music, mostly in alternative indie, but I did do some R&B as well.
Okay, so So what, if you could kind of point to a constellation of artists that you've worked with that are, I mean, maybe not wildly different from one another, but so that we can sort of see the breadth of the work that you did do, who were some of the kind of standouts for you?
Oh, I think they kind of all stood out. But as soon as you mentioned that, I'm thinking of the wonderful Tricky from Massive Attack, the trip hop band in the UK in the 90s. I did a solo record with Tricky that was, oh, what a joy. And the blues guitarist Robin Ford, and the Americana singer-songwriter Jeff Black, and the indie fringe indie band, a duo, Gegita. Geggy is maybe well known to some of your listeners because Geggy is Greg Kurstin. He's one of the most successful record producers working in the music business today. But when I worked with him in the early 90s, he was just Geg. He was a 23-year-old kid. So working with Gegita, they were on David Byrne's label, and I also worked with David Byrne and with Bare Naked Ladies and quite a variety of folks. Tevin Campbell was in there too, and of course Wendy and Lisa from Prince's band. Always having a good time with all of them.
Oh, I love that. And then as you sort of transitioned, what was the impetus for you? What made you think, I want to get a little more academic now?
I could recognize that feeling. When I was a kid, I felt a strong calling to be in the music business, and people describe a calling to enter the priesthood or things like that. And this felt like a calling to be where records were being made and contribute. Then when I got to be in my late 30s, early 40s, I began hearing another calling, and it just felt like something pulling me like a magnetic attraction into the laboratory. I saw myself wearing a white coat and looking down into a microscope, and I thought, damn, I think I'd really like that life. I'd like to study the brain. I'd like to study the nervous system and consciousness. I was so intensely curious about it. As that voice started getting stronger and stronger and stronger, I thought, oh, geez, now I've got no choice. I'm going to have to try to make this happen. And sure enough, it did. It did happen. I had a huge hit record with Bare Naked Ladies back in the late 90s. This is before Napster and streaming. So we made royalty. We got royalties. If you went multi-platinum and sold a lot of records, you got a big paycheck. And 6 months later, you got another one. So with that money, I was able to leave the music business, get my GED, enter college as a freshman, and go for 8 straight years.
I just love that story so much. And I feel like it resonates with me so much. My story is very different because I did my undergrad straight out of high school, and then I did a master's right after that. But then I left for many years. I left for 15 years, and I worked as a science communicator, and I was on television shows, and I was in Hollywood, and I was, getting paid really good money to be on camera and it was actually a really easy job for the money, to be honest. It was a lot of early mornings, but it was a pretty easy job. But there was just a part of me that kept saying, like, I want to go back. Like, there's something else that I haven't done yet. And that's why in 2017, I went back to school and I'm almost finally done. But that pull, that calling that you talk about, it's so strong in me. And it's so funny that you just can't ignore it. You're like, I'm living a lie. Like, I have to do this now because otherwise it'll just eat away at me.
I'm so interested in that. I'm interested in how little children know who they are. And I believe that most of them do. I wouldn't say that all of them do, but I think if you leave little kids alone, by the time they're 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 8, they'll tell you what they are. It's just a hunch, but I kind of think they know. And I think adults tend to get in there and want to tell them, oh, you're this. Well, you're good at drawing, so you're going to be an artist. Or you like animals, so you're going to be a veterinarian. I think children actually kind of have a good sense of their strengths and weaknesses at a young age. At least I feel like I did. And talking with other people, it seems like other people did too. If we're plugged into that inner voice, that little voice, it's your brain really telling you, here's what I want. This is what I want. If you're willing to listen to it and just follow it, well, I've always had good luck doing that, letting it go where it wants to go.
Yeah, and if you're lucky enough for that to be fostered throughout your life, I think that the outcome is really telling. And one of the insights that I've been lucky enough to sort of develop in my work in psychotherapy, I mostly work with older adults. I work with older adults with life-limiting illnesses and sadly sometimes adults who are dying. And one of the things that we often work on is like meaning-making therapy, life review, legacy work. And it's fascinating to see the massive differences between people who have always felt a strong sense of purpose or of who they are or what they wanted to do with their lives. And the people, and this is a real thing, and it's a decent percentage of people who struggle towards the end of life with what what was the point of this? Who was I? And who do I want to be in these final, days, months, years, whatever? Because I do think that sometimes our society and our expectations sort of beat it out of some people.
Mm-hmm. I see the opposite end of that. Being at a college, I work mostly with people in their early 20s, and there are some people who know exactly who they are and what they want, but there is a great many of them who aren't sure what they want. And on the surface, it might appear that they lack ambition, but I've begun to think in more recent years, maybe they're just happy. Maybe they
Right. Yeah,
maybe
there's
they
that too.
have what they want, and they don't feel any strong compulsion to drastically change, and that's okay too. We need happy people in this world. We don't need everyone to be a superstar. Mm.
Right. And sometimes being is what matters more than doing. For some people, they do to be able to be, but some people, yeah, there's almost, I don't want to say passive because I feel like that's pejorative and it's not, but there's this way that they can just be. I mean, it's very Zen Buddhist,
Yeah.
and lovely.
I like discussing with the senior students right before they graduate what success looks like to them, and have a set of questions and go around the room and ask each student more or less the same questions. And these questions concern 20 years from now, when you're in your 40s and you wake up in the morning. Are you at work? Do you work from home, or do you go to where you work? Are you in the city? Are you in the country? Are you in a suburb? When you lie your head on the pillow at night, is there someone there next to you? And if so, is that someone in the same business as you? In other words, is it okay to talk shop with your sweetheart, or would you prefer to keep those worlds separate? Just asking questions like that so that ultimately they can describe what they think they want. That may change over the years, but I believe that down deep inside we kind of know. It's probably good to know what it is you want early in your life so that you can help yourself to get it.
Yeah, I think about the Florence and the Machine song, "We all have a hunger," that there's something in us that we just yes, it's almost like a drive, as you mentioned, sometimes even that difference between needs and wants, like a need that many of us have, and I think they're so different from person to person, but if we give ourselves the opportunity to listen to it and to try, just try, walk through an open door, try on that new outfit or that new hair color or that new song and see how well it fits us. But some of us are kind of either we're afraid to try, or sadly, probably more often, we're not given the same foundation and the opportunity to be able to try. Um, and that is really heartbreaking, I think, for individuals who aren't able to follow that kind of inner voice that you mentioned. But I'm just loving the parallel between that inner voice with who you are and what you want to be, and also that parallel between your personal musical, I guess your musical personality, really, your
Mm-hmm.
taste, your
So,
drive.
because music is so intimate, because it's so often consumed in private, especially these days, listening to the music we love, turns out, is really, really an effective way to get it to activate the default network. The default network is a brain network that interconnects many nuclei, and these particular nuclei are involved with feelings of self-awareness and self-consciousness and self-identity. Uh, the default network is called default because it is thought to be the network that gets active when we go into our own heads, so to speak. So when you're not focused on a task, you're not focused on the external world, when you're daydreaming or mind wandering or thinking creatively, just going into your own head, as we say, the default network gets active. When we listen to records that we love, it lights up that default network. And what that means is the music you love the most is touching on, activating your private self. That's a really beautiful thing. Music of all the art forms is the most effective so far at activating the default network and thus at activating your self-identity, your sense of who you are, which is why our musical loves can feel so intimate and so personal to us. It almost feels like this is the music of me.
And that it's so profound, both from a sort of artistic, poetic stance, but also from a fundamental neurocognitive stance. Like, we can see it happening in an MRI, and we know that it's fundamental to who we are. And that's just such a cool connection between this ineffable and this logistical. I don't know. I don't even know how to put it, but between these two kind of different conceptions of functionality, it's just, and how cool that this is your career, is sort of bridging that gap.
It's wonderful to me that experientially I've always felt like the music that I loved was somehow a reflection of me. I've always felt like when I hear a record that I fall in love with instantly, I feels almost like I'm recognizing it, like it's an old friend or someone I knew a long time ago. It just feels so familiar, so true to myself. That's the experience of loving music, but it's wonderful to get a PhD and read empirical research reports that show, yeah, that's true. And here's how it works. And here's how we know. We can watch it in real time in a scanner, which is just fantastic to me.
So cool. So listen, Susan, we're I've taken up so much of your time already. As I start to kind of close down the conversation, which makes me very sad. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. There are a few things that come to mind. So I close all my episodes by asking these same two questions, and we'll get to them. But before we do those final questions, I'm curious, for those who whose interest was piqued and whose appetite was whetted and want to go pick up This Is What It Sounds Like, what are you hoping that the book does for them, says to them? Sort of, why did you write it, and what do you hope the readers can gather from it?
I hope that readers get a deeper sense of love and appreciation for their music, for the music that they love. The book isn't intended to tell you what good music is or bad music. It's intended to say that whatever your taste is perfect for you. So now that you have this vocabulary, now you might be better equipped to be able to tell friends why you like this artist, why you like this record, why that latest record really disappointed you, why you like what you like. I also hope to help people recognize you know more about music than you think you do. You might not know all the rules and the theories, but you know about music experientially. You know how it functions for you, and you should be proud of your taste in music. Whatever your taste is, you should be proud of that. I really hope that happens.
Oh, I love that so much. It's just so strengths based. It's so individualized. And coming from the psychotherapy world, it's exactly how I approach doing work with clients. It's like, what are the things in you that make you unique? What are the things in you that are beautiful and meaningful? And how do we tap into those things and really validate them and own them, as opposed to feeling shame or comparing ourselves to others all the time? Because I think it's very easy to get stuck in a musical, I don't know, like, what's the right word for this? Like comparing yourself to other people and being like, oh, my tastes are very derivative, or, oh, I listen to pop, therefore I'm not as sophisticated a musician. And what a sad thing to feel bad about the things that that bring you joy.
I'll tell you, I had that experience at a dinner party in Boston about 12, 13 years ago. We were 6 of us, we were around the table, and the conversation was on the Beatles. And they were talking about how great the Beatles were, and I was sitting across from the dean. He's no longer a dean at Berklee, but at that time he was. And I said to him, I've never been that crazy about the Beatles. And he looked just gobsmacked. And I said, I don't know, they were always okay, but I've never owned any Beatles records. I've always liked the Rolling Stones better from music of that era. And he sat and he stared at me for a long time. And then he said, I think you're faking it. I think you're saying that just because you want to try to be cool or something. And I felt really hurt. First off, who would do that? Like,
Right.
how is it cool to say you're not into the Beatles? But second of all, I was just being completely honest. It's like saying I don't like fried food or I don't like turtleneck sweaters. Who cares? And who would think that describing your likes and dislikes would be some sort of manipulative ploy to get to be seen as a certain way? I was only being 100% candid. But that question or that incident really stuck with me. And it was one of the motivating factors to write this book. We like what we like. And the best thing we can do is be honest about what we like. It just is what it is.
It's the way to live a joyful life, is to go towards the things that bring us joy and not be ashamed of them and not be embarrassed of them and not try to make ourselves into others for the approval of whatever whims society has at that moment. And this is a real struggle for young adults. It's a real struggle for teenagers as they're trying on different identities and learning who they are. We all try to fit in. And as we try to fit in, what we're really fitting in with is whoever has the loudest voice. We're not fitting in with any sort of objective, reality of what is better or worse. And being able to own ourselves is the path to joy. And how lovely that you capture that so well.
Well, in the music business, what really makes a producer excited, or at least many of the producers I knew and the kind of producer I was, is when you see a musician who's different from everyone else. You love those individual quirks. You love that unique expressivity. That's where the gold is. Now you can use that. You can work with that with someone who is a different flavor. And I can't see why the same doesn't hold true for listeners as well. That those unique profiles are what make us interesting, and ultimately they are what makes music interesting. Our different appetites inspire the musical chefs to create a wide variety of music so that there's something for everyone.
Oh, what a great way to put that. So Susan, I'm really curious. I don't know why. I'm always curious about my guests' answers to these last two questions, but I think because of the nature of the conversation that we've been having, I'm even more kind of like, I have no idea what she's going to say. So at the close of the show, I always ask the folks that join me on Talk Nerdy to think about the future. And I want you to think about the future in whatever context feels relevant to you. It could have to do with your vocation. It could have to do with your industry. It could have to do with your family, your community. It could be global. It could be cosmic. So when you think about the future, I want to know two things. First, what is the thing that's keeping you up the most at night? The thing you're most concerned about? Maybe you got some pessimism, borderline cynicism going on. What really deeply worries you? And then on the flip side of that, so that we can end on that note that I think you so beautifully played throughout this interview, where are you finding your hope and your optimism? What are you truly and really authentically looking forward to?
Those are good questions. So since I've just retired from Berklee, I've been toying with that internalized movie of what the future looks like for a long time. I left the music business in the year 2000 in the hopes of being a scientist. And because I started my scientific career so late in life, I was 52 when I got my PhD, I wasn't going to have a research career. It just really wasn't going to happen. So what I think about when I think of the future now is finally, at long last, having uninterrupted stretches of time where I can study and research and write and maybe, just maybe, add my voice to the conversation in the sciences. I have wanted that with a passion for 22 years. Life had made it hard, and of course my age made it hard. But now that I'm going to have more time after I finish touring the book, I can hardly wait to do what I feel I would love doing, which is just investigating the natural world and how that world works. It brings me so much joy. The thing that worries me, of course, is that I won't have enough time. You always wonder how much time is it going to take, and can I really do it? And there's so many other things. I like to sew, and I love animals. I just moved out to the country, and I've got a paddock and a barn, and I can have a couple of horses, and I really want to get into gardening. And when you think of the richness of life and how much there is to know and explore and do, it's pretty easy to get distracted. The comedian Jerry Seinfeld said, "Lack of focus is the biggest enemy of greatness." And like anyone who is 6 years old or 66 years old, I want to do something great. I want to try to achieve greatness. So yes, I know what I want. I've wanted it for a long time, and I hope I can get it.
Ugh, I can palpably feel through my computer screen the sparkle and the smile in your eyes, and it's infectious, I have to tell you. Like I'm feeling all of the feels of what it means to be a human being in this world, and what it means to identify what we love and what we need, and to go out and to experience it. And I want to thank you beyond the incredible work that you did, both for the music industry and for our listening pleasure, and the incredible work that you're doing, or did, and are continuing to do as a professor and as a researcher. But also just thank you for your voice and your perspective, because it's very affecting. And I just really appreciated this conversation so much.
Thank you so much, Cara. You're so good at what you do. You ask such good questions, and you bring the best out in people. I can tell that right away. So I'm really grateful to be on your show and to have you bring that out in me.
Oh, thank you so much. And everybody listening, thank you. Once again, I say this every week, but thank you for coming back. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.